Hello, and welcome to our February webinar, Write Like a Professional. So to get started, my name's Alexis, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Coordinator at UMA. We're very excited to be here with you guys tonight. Our speaker, Kelsey Tressler, will be presenting tonight's webinar. Kelsey is an award-winning writer with years of experience within the healthcare and education space. She's contributed to dozens of publications and blogs, including inhealthcaretoday.com, where she provides job search, career, and life advice. As we get ready for the webinar, we were wondering what you're most excited about learning tonight. So we have a quick little poll that I'm going to launch. If you give me 1 second. Okay. So you should see it on your screen. Go ahead, we'll give you about 10 seconds. Let us know, maybe it's editing, punctuation, grammar, spelling, or professional emails. Give everyone a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. It's pretty fair across, but we've got most people saying professional emails. That's great. Kelsey's actually going to cover a little bit of everything, so we're looking forward to kind of jumping right in. Just to let you know the webinar, how it will run, Kelsey will talk for about 25 minutes, and then she'll save a few minutes at the end to answer some of your questions. Feel free to send your questions at any time in the chat box to the right. We'll collect them for the last 5 or so minutes of our Q&A. And last thing before getting started, we just wanted to say thank you all for joining us. So I'm going to pass it over to Kelsey now.
Hi, Alexis. Thank you so much. So just to give a little bit more introduction about me, I am a professional copywriter for Ultima Medical Academy, and I have a background in print journalism with actually a degree in print journalism and online media. So writing is what I do for a living. And so for most of you, writing probably isn't what you do for a living, but did you know that writing is actually in nearly every profession in some way? From patient notes to emails to reports and briefs, no matter what you do, you're going to have to communicate through writing in some way at work. And then on top of that, your job search depends on writing, because you have your resume and your cover letter that you send out to employers. So we have some statistics here for you that we hope will be a little bit eye-opening. According to a 2014 Contempt survey, 63% of senior managers surveyed said that 1 or 2 typos would automatically send a resume into the trash. So I want you guys to just think for a second how hard you work on your resume and how hard you've worked at your career training and the job search prep and everything that you do. And all of that could be lost in those few seconds if you don't learn to communicate well via writing. So we definitely don't want that to happen. Luckily, the basics of writing are pretty simple to master, and it just takes a little bit of work to, kind of put your best foot forward and communicate professionally. So in this webinar, we will talk about writing don'ts and how to avoid them, the importance of editing, how to structure a work email, and tools and apps that you can use to help you with spelling and grammar. So let's get started. Let's go to writing don'ts. So the first one we're going to talk about is homonyms, or words that sound alike. These are ones that you've probably studied a little bit before, but we wanted to touch on them because these are some of the most common mistakes, and they're the most common mistakes that can make you look bad in your writing. So we'll focus on there, and there first. There is a place, so the computer is over there. T-H-E-I-R, there implies ownership, so that is their computer. And then there is a contraction of they are, so they're going to the mall to buy a new computer. And so a really simple way to kind of differentiate, at least the last two, is can you replace it with they are? So if you can't replace the sentence with they are and have it make sense, then that shouldn't be the one that you use there. And then for the ownership there, if you can't say that the subject owns whatever you're talking about, then you know not to use it there as well. So we're going to talk about 2, 2, and 2 next. To, to expresses motion or direction, so you go to something. For example, you go to dinner. To is a synonym for also and as well, and it can also be used to describe something as excessive or over the top. So he's too excited. And then you can say something like, I want to go to. And in that sentence, you could replace to with also and as well. And then TWO is probably the most simple one because it is the one that replaces the number 2. So anytime that you have 2 of something, you're going to use TWO. And next we'll talk about your and your. Your is possessive, so what is your favorite hobby? And your is a contraction of you are, so you're fun to be around. In other words, you are fun to be around. So this is the same, you can use the same trick that we learned for there, and there for this one. If you can't replace it with you are and have that make sense, then that's not the form that you want to use.
Okay. Kelsey, I just want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
It looks like someone's saying they can't hear us anymore. Can everyone else still hear us? Are we having any audio problems? If you could just let us know yes, if you can hear us, that would be great. Send it in the chat. Yep, okay. It looks like some people can still hear us, so hopefully we'll be able to get that one grad situated. But continue.
Okay. Thank you, Alexis. All right, so next we're going to talk about then versus than. And this one can be a little bit complicated, and I know people can tend to struggle with this one. So then, THEN, is an expression of time. So I woke up and then made breakfast, whereas than is a comparison. So her breakfast is better than mine. So just think about if you're comparing two things and you're saying one is better or worse than the other one, then that's when you'll use THAN. And if you're expressing time, then that's when you use THEN. So now we're going to move on to our next don't, which is using slang or chat speak. So I know these can be a lot of fun. I know we all text and we get on Facebook and social media, and we enjoy using chat speak and slang. But generally speaking, in professional communications, you don't want to use these at all. They run the risk of making you sound less intelligent than you are. And, we know that you guys have worked really hard to, learn your professional skills and to know how to do your job well. So we just want to make sure that you sound professional. So just stick to spelling out your words and avoid slang unless you're with your friends and family. All right, so we're going to talk about misspellings as well. So most computers and programs have spell check. So at this point with technology, there's really no reason to have spelling errors in your text. So if you're finding that you have a lot of spelling errors, it's probably because you just need to slow down and make sure that you're reading through your writing a second or maybe even a third time and just making sure that you're catching all of the mistakes that your computer will probably find for you anyway. And this touches on the importance of editing, which we will definitely cover more in depth later. Okay, so next up is comma splices. Commas can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So a comma splice is basically where when you put a comma where a comma shouldn't go, where it doesn't belong in a sentence. So generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, commas usually need a conjunction. So that's words like and, or, but, so, and words of that nature. So the sentence following is incorrect. I love my job. I'm learning a lot. Although I think a lot of us would be inclined to say something like that. But to fix it, it's really easy. All you have to do is add a word like and. I love my job, and I'm really learning a lot. So that's comma splices for you. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about excessive punctuation. Again, this is another thing that's kind of born out of social media and texting. We like to show that we're excited or that we're confused with a bunch of question marks. But again, when you're communicating in your writing, whether it's emails or patient notes or anything like that, you definitely want to avoid excessive punctuation. It just doesn't look professional, and it kind of makes you just look a little too casual. So when you use an exclamation point, I would say use them very sparingly, if at all, but if you do use them, just use one. That's all you need. And the same with question marks, although you'll obviously use this much more often. And then in work communication, it's really great to just kind of avoid ellipses, which are, the ... A lot of times you don't really need that in your writing, and it can come off as a little bit vague or passive-aggressive. I don't know if you've ever received a text message with ellipses after the end, and you're like, what does that mean? So you just never want to cause any kind of confusion for your coworkers. Okay, and now we're going to move on to the wrong punctuation. So we talked a little bit about commas already, but we're going to add in semicolons and colons to that. So semicolons are used to separate two independent clauses or complete sentences. So if you wanted to say, the webinar was great, I learned a lot, that's where you would have a semicolon, and that would make that sentence acceptable, whereas having a comma there would not. That would be a comma splice. And then if you want to use, if you want to express a series or a list, it's really good to use a colon. But if you do use a colon, you don't use words like are or including or such as. You would just go straight into the colon in the list. So the webinar taught me, colon, punctuation, grammar, and spelling. And then commas, as we talked about before, separate two independent clauses with a preposition after the comma. Or they separate a dependent clause and an independent clause. So the webinar was great and I learned a lot. Or while I attended the webinar, my kids did their homework. So, and then if you ever use quotation marks, if you ever, trying to express what a patient said maybe or something like that, you would use a comma and it would go inside of the quotation mark. So that's a really common error. So just make sure you put it inside. And we're going to move into emojis. So again, emojis are really fun. We love using them. We have our favorites, but they just don't belong in work communications, which are not meant to be fun. They're just meant to inform and to get your point across. So you want to be as straightforward and to the point as possible. So just leave the fun emojis for your text messages and for your friends and family. And we're going to talk about jargon as well. So jargon is are words or expressions relating to a specific profession or group that may not be understood by others outside of that profession or group. So if you think about it, you guys are trained in healthcare, for example, so there's probably words that you know that your patients or people outside of the healthcare industry might not necessarily understand. And it's really great to use these words when you're, talking to people who will understand you, but you also have to be aware that they're not common knowledge for everyone. So when you're talking to someone outside of your, outside of your colleagues, especially to patients, then you want to be as clear as possible to the person you're talking to so they don't misunderstand your communication. Okay, and we're going to talk about writing in a passive voice. Instead of writing in a passive voice, it's better to write an active voice, which will make you sound more direct and more confident. Active voice occurs when the sentence subject performs the verb. So if you have the sentence, I watched the webinar, I is the subject, watched is the verb, and the subject is performing the verb. So that is active voice. Passive voice occurs when the verb is performed upon the subject. So if you have the webinar was watched by me, the webinar is actually the subject, and the verb is acting upon the subject, but the subject isn't doing the verb. So that's where you get passive voice. And so passive voice can come across as kind of weak, or it can come across as a little indecisive. So you definitely just want to go for that active voice whenever you can. And we're going to talk about writing numbers, and actually this is our last don't. So you want to make sure that you're writing your numbers correctly, especially because in the healthcare field there's usually some data to work with. So you want to write out numbers 1 through 9, and then use the numerical symbol for 10 and up. And the exception is to always spell out numbers if they begin a sentence, but if you can, it's even better to reword that sentence so the number doesn't come first. Okay, so those are our don'ts, and next we're going to move on to the importance of editing. So I think we've all had this experience where we have to write something really, really quickly, and then we want to send it out as fast as possible so that the person receiving it can get the information. However, when you send things out that quickly, you run the risk of making it a confusing communication, but also having some of those mistakes that we just talked about. So I recommend rereading your communication at least twice before you send it out. Once for clarity, to make sure that you're actually saying what you want to say and that it's coming across correctly, and then again for typos, spelling errors, and other grammatical issues. And this might take you an extra 5 minutes, but it's worth it to build up a positive professional image of you so that people get used to your communications and your writing being clear, concise, and correct. Your resume in particular should go through several rounds of editing. So I recommend the same amount as before. So reading it over twice, once for clarity and then once for grammar and punctuation and those sorts of things. But then I would recommend reading it on a different medium. So this means if you're reading it on your laptop, print it out if you have the means, and then read it as a handout. And doing that can really help your brain, because if you've worked on something for so long, your brain might interpret even incorrect sentences to be what you mean instead of what is actually there. So this helps you catch those mistakes that your brain might miss. You can also, if you can't print it out, you can also change the font. Sometimes that really helps. And you can read it backwards from the bottom up to try and catch errors, because your brain won't be able to fill in what it thinks you're trying to say. And then last but not least, if you can, it is a great idea to actually hand the document off to someone else, because a second pair of eyes will be incredibly helpful. If you spent a lot of time working on your resume, you can get too close to it, and this just helps somebody with fresh eyes take a look and, you know, kind of give it a good editing. And just so you guys know, UMA does have a dedicated resume writing team that you can reach out to for assistance. So if you would like to use that service, you can call the UMA Alumni Career Services number at 888-216-0535, and they can definitely help you put your resume together and make sure that it's free of typos and those sorts of things. So next we're going to move on to the subject that I know interested a lot of people for this webinar, which is great, is how to structure a work email. So if you've never written a work email before, you might be a little bit confused as to how to set it up. And that's okay, because everyone starts somewhere. So I'm going to provide you with a pretty simple template that should help you work through writing a work email. So first, you're going to start with the subject line, and you want that to be direct and to the point and not contain too many exclamation points or unnecessary words. So that needs to be something that your recipient can read over and understand immediately what your email is about. Then you move on to the actual recipients. So who should actually receive your email? And should it only go to that person, or should someone else know the information that you're including? So in most software systems, you can add recipients either directly to the email recipient list, or you can CC or even BCC people. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. It stands for carbon copy, CC, although that's kind of dated language now, but we still call it that. And that means you are sharing the email communication with them and allowing the recipient to see that you have copied someone on it. So this is good to use when you need to loop in a manager or coworker, but they don't necessarily have to reply. So they don't have to directly answer, but they need to know that the conversation is happening. So if you want someone to directly reply to your email, then that's when you would make them the actual recipient of the email. So we do have BCC, which is blind CCing people, and you really want to avoid this unless you're sending an email list to a huge group of people and you don't want to bother all of the recipients with a long email conversation, because if people hit reply all, then they're going to reply to the whole list, and that can get really frustrating. So the reason that you want to avoid this is you generally want the subject of your email to know that other people can see it, and you definitely never want to use BCC as any kind of trick or to try to get somebody to say something. Like, you just don't want to do it. And then you should also use BCC when the recipients, there's information in the email that shouldn't be disclosed to other recipients. So for example, if you don't want to send out everybody's email to everybody else, you can use BCC so that they don't know each other, so that they can't collect that information. So now that we've got the recipients worked out, we're going to move on to the salutation. So it's best to have a salutation instead of jumping right into the email. It makes it a little more personal, a little friendlier. This can be something as simple as dear and then the person's name that you're writing to, or it can be good morning, good evening if you want to go more general, or it can even be as simple as hello and the recipient's name. The point is just to not jump right into the email and to give a little bit of, a little bit of an intro. After that, you move to the body of the email, and this is probably one of the most important parts of the email. So you want to make sure that you're brief and to the point, that you provide all of the information necessary for them to understand what you're trying to communicate. And if you have a lot of information, for one, make sure that you need to include all of that information, but if you do, then it's important to break it out into multiple paragraphs to help with readability. I'm sure all of you have received a text message or some kind of social media message or something, or email at some point that was really, really long and had no breaks at all. And it's very difficult to read, particularly on a tablet or a cell phone. So just definitely add in paragraphs. And this is the case where you would remember your writing don'ts, and you'll make sure that you don't have any grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes or things of that nature. And if you do end up having a lot of information, you can always use bullet points to make your emails more readable and more scannable, because most people are going to kind of scan through. They might not necessarily read it, directly from start to finish. So once we get through the body, then we move on to the closing. So sometimes companies include a closing in their company-wide signature. So it might say something like best regards or sincerely. If that's not included, then you can certainly add those yourself. Those are good ones to use. If it's someone that you know well and have a relationship with, you can say take care. And then if the recipient is assisting you in some way, you can also close with thank you for all your help. This is really the part where you're putting on your manners and you're just being polite and thanking people for their time. And then it'll usually go into a signature. So companies and facilities often have signatures that they want you to use. They'll usually include your name, your title, your company email and phone number, and sometimes the address of the office in which you work. If your company doesn't have a standard signature for some reason, then I would consider creating one for yourself, because it can definitely increase your professionalism and your reliability. It's just really nice for people to see that. Plus, they get a hold of your information, so if they need to call you or email you back, they have it right there. So now that we've gone through all of the parts of an email, this is an example for you guys to just read over. So we've got the to, which is me, and then we have Alexis CC'd because she helped with this webinar. And then the subject is very clear, question regarding UMA's recent webinar. And then we have Dear Ms. Tressler. And the body is, I thoroughly enjoyed the Write Like a Professional webinar that I attended tonight. I was wondering if you could send me a recording so that I could watch it again. That's super clear, super short, tells me what this person needs, and then it goes into best regards, Jane, and then the signature. And just if you're wondering, yes, by the way, we can send you a recording of this if you would like to watch it again. So now that we've gone through how to structure a work email, we're going to move on to tools to help you in your writing. So most computers and programs have a lot of tools that can help you built in, like Microsoft Word will help you check the basics, the spelling, that sort of thing. If your computer doesn't offer spell check, you can try writing your emails and reports in Word and then copying them over to your final destination once you make sure everything's correct. So you can do this with TextEdit, Google Docs, Office Online, and whatever word processing system you use. Usually they come with some form of grammar and spelling check. We also have some apps for you if you're an app person and you really like having, an app to pull up and use. Some good ones are Grammarly, GingerPage, and the Hemingway app. The Hemingway app is desktop only. And these apps can help you track your grammar and spelling and sentence structure. They can help you find better word choice and things like that. So those are really helpful, and they're inline edits for the most part. So they actually edit as you're writing. Particularly Grammarly is really great about that. And then you can also use apps like the Webster's Dictionary app, Grammar Girl, Grammar Phone, and more to help you learn about language and writing. So those are ones that you can kind of reference. They don't necessarily track you in your writing, but if you have a question about a word or how to say something, they're really great to have on reference. So in conclusion, the key takeaways for this webinar are that writing is an important aspect of professionalism. No matter what profession you're in, you'll usually have emails, reports, patient notes, or other written communications that make it important to have writing skills. Writing is also an important aspect of the job search because your resume and cover letter are your first introduction to the potential employer, and if you have typos in there, you might not make it to the next round. So with these tips, we hope that you can begin to write better and to improve your professional reputation. Do we have any questions now that we've reached the end of the webinar?
We've got a few minutes left, so if you guys want to send any questions into the chat box, we can have Kelsey answer them. She's a great resource. Oh, here's one. Can you please repeat what BCC means?
Absolutely. Okay, so when you CC someone, that means that you are copying them on an email, and the recipient of the email can see that. They can see that somebody has been copied. A BCC is when you copy someone on an email, but the recipient cannot see that you have copied that person. Does that make sense? So that's why it's called blind CC, because the other person cannot see that someone has been copied.
Yep.
Okay.
She got that.
Great.
Any other questions? We've got 2 more minutes here. Oh, can you please go back to the comma part? Could you just elaborate maybe a little bit more on commas, Kelsey?
Absolutely. Commas are kind of a big, complicated subject. So the thing that we just want you to remember is that usually if you have a sentence, you don't want to just throw a comma in without something that links it together. So that's kind of the function of and, or, so, but, like those sorts of words. So if you have something like that before the comma, then chances are you're going to be more in the right than if you don't have that. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
We've got a question about getting a copy of this webinar. Yes, we will certainly send this out. We will have a follow-up email with the recording. So make sure to be on the lookout for that. That way you'll be able to watch it at your own pace and kind of go through all of the helpful tips that Kelsey has shared with us tonight. Last question we'll take real quick. Do quotation marks go inside the question mark or period?
Yes, so you will put the exclamation point or the period or the question mark inside of the quotation. I believe that was the question. Any punctuation will go inside.
Yep, that's correct. All right, so last thing, we would just love for you guys to maybe review us if you could, if you had a good time at the webinar tonight, if you could just share your experience with UMA at the Better Business Bureau. It's www.bbb.com. You'll select Ultimate Medical Academy, and then you'll go to Tampa, Florida. And if you just wanted to leave a sentence or two, we would greatly appreciate it. We hope you all have a wonderful night, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. I hope you learned a lot.